Dissidia Final Fantasy is easily my favorite fighting game, mostly because it's not really a fighting game. It's a 1v1 action game in the vein of Kingdom Hearts. I have sunk an unhealthy number of hours into both of the old PSP games, and I was stoked to hear they're making a new Dissidia. As more info was revealed and eventually the game was released in Japanese arcades, my doubts of the new game started to swell. But I wanted to believe in the game. Now that I've actually gotten to play it, thanks to the open beta, I can say this. Way to miss the point. Dissidia NT is a pretty boneless take on the original games. Dissidia Duodecim, a sequel to the original Dissidia, weighed in at 31 playable characters, with 9 of them being new. Dissidia NT's roster comes just shy with 28 characters. A season pass promises to add 6 more characters, but that's a little later on. Regardless of warnings, I wasn't scared for the future of Dissidia, but after playing the beta, nothing's like before. The biggest, most obvious change to the formula in Dissidia New Testament is that it's not 1v1 anymore. Duodecim flirted with the idea by introducing assist characters, which let you call on a friend for a bonus attack. Dissidia No Tomorrow, however, is full-on multiplayer with teams of 3 at a time. Honestly, on a fundamental level, I don't think Dissidia's combat system can support this idea. The core concept of attacking your enemies to raise a so-called bravery number, which in turn determines how much damage your special attacks deal, works in a one-on-one scenario. But keeping track of 6 numbers as well as 3 characters' special attacks is pretty rough. As a result of this broadening of the scope, the attacks in this new Dissidia are a lot wider than the older games. Not only that, but you're limited to a single special attack, where the original game could let you have 6 or more. Since these special attacks are the only way to deal damage to your opponent, it makes you pretty predictable. This was already a pretty heavily criticized problem in the original game, and now you have even less options. Seemingly trying to compensate, HP attacks are usually a big blast that can catch multiple characters, but it's a pretty brute force solution. Less special attacks isn't the only way that customization has been cut down in this game. As a whole, Dissidia Non-Transferable feels like it's going for competitive balance. The original games let you equip a bunch of stat and characteristic modifying equipment and accessories. Each character would level up and learn new abilities. Things are a lot more static this time around. Characters are broken down into a handful of stock classes, and you have far fewer options to change your character's abilities. The most significant new thing is EX skills. You can equip 2 generic EX skills which gradually charge up and give you a special move, things like buffs for your allies or debuffs for your enemies. Each character also has a unique EX skill which is meant to inform their playstyle. But that's just the problem. Some of the characters are way less defined in this version of the game than in the PSP versions. Every character in the first 2 Dissidias had a clear and easy to understand gimmick. The character select screen explained exactly what they did. Exdeath was all about guards. Sephiroth had precise attacks that you could delay your inputs on to get more hits in. Tifa could feint to teleport around the enemy. Firion was really strong on the ground, while Zidane was at his best in the air. Gabranth was incredibly weak, but could charge up his special gauge to become really powerful. I could go on, but my point is they're well defined. Dissidia Nice Try feels way more homogenized. For example, Bartz in the original Dissidia had a moveset comprised of other characters' attacks that were combined in unique ways, referencing the Mime class from his game. In Dissidia Newfoundland Time, he instead uses a variety of generic weapons, and I want to quickly point out that weapon switching is already a gimmick Vaughn and Firion use, and Bartz's gimmick becomes that he'll eventually master these weapons as he uses them more and more in the battle. Once a weapon is mastered, the attack becomes more powerful. A lot of the gimmicks in the new Dissidia revolve around simply being more powerful, rather than changing how the characters play. Take for example Terra. In both games she can enter her Esper form. In the original games this gave her an ability called Chain Spell, which let her double up on all her magic abilities. Basically she'd cast more spells in one attack. Which changed the properties of all her moves, making them easier to land hits, land more hits overall, last longer, all kinds of stuff. In Dissidia Network Theory, her Esper form makes her stats go up. She does more damage. Overall, Dissidia No Trespassing is a slower feeling game. This is the most obvious with the dash ability. In the original games, it was a means of closing distance between you and your opponent quickly. There was a downside. since a dash doesn't deal damage but it can be blocked, which left you wide open, encouraging you not to be overzealous. The dash in Dissidia Non-Toxic is drastically slower. You can dash for a long time, it slowly consumes a stamina gauge while you use it, but its lack of speed means it's very easy for another character to get away from it. If one character dashes towards a character and the other one dashes away, it'll become a really boring stalemate. I mentioned guarding, and that's different too. In the new game, it works kinda like Smash Bros. You generate a shield that breaks if you get hit too much. In the original, it functioned like a guard in Kingdom Hearts, playing a quick animation that would make your opponent recoil if their attack hit them. A successful guard briefly gives you a high chance to do critical damage, while successfully punishing a guard would grant the same effect to the attacker. I think Dissidia new type needed the omnidirectional guard because thanks to the 3v3 nature, attacks can come from anywhere, but it doesn't help a whole lot since attacks can come from off screen with no warning. See, Dissidia Not Tested has a pretty major flaw, something that eclipses all these other things, and that's that it's hard to see. Your character can get lost behind the UI, they can even go completely off camera. Special effects can easily clog the entire screen, but heaven help you if a summon gets called.
Crush them under the ocean's waves.
In the old games, they were simple. There was a bunch of different kinds you could equip, and each one had a different effect on your bravery. For a simple example, a freak could multiply your bravery by 1.5. In Dissidia Neo Tokyo, however, they flood the screen with particle effects. Even if the summon is on your side, it's easy to lose track of things. But when it's against you, it becomes a nightmare to keep track of, because these particle effects are also hitboxes.
Use your skills in the world.
The game is chaotic, but you're really not given the tools to actually deal with this chaos very well. The deepest issue with this game is its gameplay, for sure, but frankly, every aspect has its problems, especially if you compare it to the older games which worked on much weaker hardware. They're dealing with way more buttons than the PSP had, yet the control scheme is somehow worse, since they decided to dedicate the triangle button to EX skills, where it used to be a catch-all mobility button that let you run up walls and jump across gaps. Instead now, climbing up things is done by holding down the jump button while dashing. I mentioned the dash before, but it's really weird. It's slow like I said, but unlike the originals, it's done simply by holding down the R button now, where it used to be R plus triangle. The classic Dissidia dash was a fast rush towards your opponent as long as you were locked onto them. Now to do a dash towards your opponent you have to stop. Dashing while pointing in a direction will make you dash in that direction with no vertical movement. It makes it even less effective in chasing your opponent. It's an unnecessary wrinkle that makes your slow mobility options feel even worse. Now controls aside, the original Dissidia has included a lot of single-player content, including a bunch of short campaigns, one for each Final Fantasy game from 1 to 10 in the first game, and the sequel had a new campaign focusing on the new characters. Each campaign involved exploring board game-looking dungeons, finding treasure, and in Duodecim exploring a world map. By comparison, the campaign in the new game is a board of cutscenes that you spend items to unlock. You get what you need to unlock cutscenes by grinding fights in other modes. To call it a step down is a huge understatement. Similarly, mobile games seem to be infecting Square Enix's console titles, since you unlock items from random loot boxes. Granted, I don't think the game has microtransactions, but what was wrong with just buying things from an in-game store? What's the benefit to random treasure? Even small, inconsequential things in Dissidia Never-Ending Trash managed to get worse. The old Dissidias handled tutorials in a fun way. They had various characters from throughout the franchise explain the game's mechanics. This time around, it's just generic text. Basically, Dissidia NT failed to bring over any of the really good stuff from its predecessors. Yet it's not different enough to work as a new multiplayer brawler either. There's a half-hearted attempt at competitive balance that makes the game way less interesting, sacrificing modes, customization, and overall depth, despite the game being an utter mess that could never hope of being truly competitive. The feeling of an identity crisis hangs over this game. It doesn't get what made Dissidia fun, but it doesn't get how to make its new ideas fun either. It's such a shame that Dissidia went this way. It could have been something. It still could, really. But this was just plain a bad direction to take the series.
Koopo! Go crush that core, Koopo!
Let's get to summoning!
Summon your serpent, Koopo!